All right, so welcome to this particular video where we're going to talk about negative numbers with respect to multiplication, the operation of multiplication. We're going to start with positive numbers, then we're going to get into some scenarios where we have some negative numbers to deal with. And of course, we're going to talk about all of these things using money, because money is something that we all understand. All right, so I have here 5 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, this is Trinidad and Tobago currency. Yeah, and each one of these words has $3, single dollars. All right, let me just do like when they draw any lotto, make sure everybody see. All right, $3. Yeah, that's one. Tie it up, brothers. All right, 3. Yeah, I'm doing this deliberately because I want people to see the physical manifestation of these things. Look, the second one. 1, 2, 3. All right, this is the first one here. I put it on the side there. Watch my hand, right? No magic. Right? All right, there's 1. Right? Second word, 2. The third word, bam, look at it. 3 again. 1, 2, 3. Yeah? Yeah. Tie it up. Serious matters, you know. Right? 3 words. Look at next one here again. Bam. 1, 2, 3. Yeah? Yeah. And so there's four words, eh? And then we have another word here. Look at it again. 1, 2, 3. All right. So we took 5 from over here and we put them over here. Right. So watch it now. 5 words of $3 each. Look them here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm chuck one in the center here. 5. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And we understand that immediately as multiplication, because we have 5 words. And each word has $3. And when we count them all together, we expect to get $15. Right? Or we have $3 in each word, and we have 5 words of bills. WAD, word. The 3 by 5 is the same 15. All right? So in terms of positive numbers, we understand that when you're multiplying two positive numbers, the operation is what we refer to as being commutative. Right? Meaning that the order in which you multiply doesn't matter. So 5 by 3 is 15. 3 by 5 is the same 15. You will see eventually that that also applies when we're dealing with negative numbers. So we move on now from positive into negative. What are the kind of situations that we could consider in dealing with money where we might have to use negative numbers. Basic idea. Dealing with money, generally speaking, in mathematical language and in financial language, plus $15 means that I have $15 in my pocket. Braps, that is my $15. My $15, right? Make sure the mic. There. Minus $15 could mean, well, let me continue with plus. Plus $15 mean that I have $15 in my hand. It could also mean that somebody giving me $15. In other words, plus means money coming to me. Money in my bank account, so to speak. Money in my back pocket. Minus $15 could mean that I pay in $15. I giving somebody $15. I give away $15. Maybe I owe somebody $15. A debt, in other words. It could mean that I borrow $15, which means at some point I'll have to pay back $15. So I don't consider that $15 as belonging to me. That is $15 that I have to put back out at some point, right? In that case, we could put a minus sign in front of it. Woo, yeah, boy. In that case, we could put a minus sign in front of the 15 and represent that as minus 15, right? Remember we discussed earlier on, and we talked about the negative sign as a conveyor of meaning. It means something. So in this case, the negative sign, when we're talking about money, generally speaking, it implies a state of money leaving, right? As opposed to positive means that money coming in. So, if I have, let me consider the case of multiplication, right? So each of these is $3, right? Let us say that I pay somebody, I have some kind of debt to pay, right? And we structure the debt in such a way that I have to pay $3 every week for 5 weeks. The $3 that I have to pay, I could consider that as minus 3 because it's a debt. So each of these words is a debt of $3. And because I'm paying over the course of 5 weeks, it means that if I want to calculate the amount of money that I owe in total, I could actually consider this as minus 3 by 5, and that would be equal to minus 15. Right? Of course, in natural language, we will just say 3 by 5 because we already understand in the context in which we speak that the $3 is $3 of debt. We understand that the $3 going out, it's leaving. The $3 is leaving our coffers, leaving our account, right? So in natural language, we have 15. But in the language of mathematics, in the language of finance, whatever. In the language of finance, right? You're doing a report, you're doing a balance sheet, you're doing a calculation. Because you're not speaking using natural language, it is written language now. So you have to find something within the written language to convey the same sense of meaning that you take for granted when you're speaking in a situation where everybody understands the context in which you're speaking. So to get around that, we have specific rules in maths. One of those rules is that we could use the minus sign. So minus 3 by 5 is minus 15. So your overall debt is 15, which you already understand using natural language. But using this rule, the minus sign appears here as part of each debt of $3. You multiply by 5 times, the minus sign also appears in the answer as debt. So all of this is what I owe. But minus 3, minus 3, minus 3, minus 3, minus 3. So minus 3 by 5 is minus 15. No problem. Right? We could flip the script and say, well, all right. I have 5 weeks to pay off a particular debt, and every week I'm paying off a debt of $3. So all I do is change the order in which I refer to the debt and the timeline. So this is the debt, DEBT, right? This is the debt that we owe, and this is the timeline, right? Now I switch the flip now and I refer to the timeline first. So now we're talking about the fact that I have 5 weeks to pay this debt, right? I have 5 weeks to pay, and in each of those 5 weeks, let me make a better 5 than that now. In each of those 5 weeks, we're paying a debt of $3. Again, the minus sign tells you that money leaving. Minus 3 as opposed to plus 3. Right? We know that 5 by 3 is 15. 5 plus 5 by minus 3 is minus 15. So again, same situation, just a different way of referring to it, and you end up with the same answer of minus 15 as the total debt. Alright? So this is the time, and this is the debt. Right? This here we could call that the total debt. Right? This here is the total debt. Right. No problem. Let us now switch from multiplication. Sorry, before we switch from multiplication to division, let me just take the opportunity to point out the general rule. So the general rule, when you're multiplying, right? The general rule when you're multiplying is, in this case, this is one rule, right? We have our next situation to deal with shortly, all right? One rule there. I want to make it clear that when you're multiplying a negative number, right, the rule is that if you're multiplying a negative number by a positive number, the answer is always a negative number. And it applies in reverse. If you're multiplying a positive number by a negative number, the answer is still a negative number. So it does not matter whether you're multiplying minus 3 by 5 or 5 by minus 3. In both cases, the answer is minus 15. I'm taking my time to explain these things, because when you're in a class of folks who really not confident, you'll have to spend half an hour going back and forth here, because everybody going to put up their hand to ask the same question. All right, so that's basically the situation there. What about the situation now where we have two negative numbers multiplied by each other? All right, no problem. The first thing we have to do is define the negative number in each case. Right? So in this same scenario where we have the $3, let us say that again I have a debt of $3 to pay off in 5 installments. Right? 5 installments, whether it's weekly or monthly or whatever it is. We just discussed a situation where a debt of $3 in 5 installments is a debt of $15. Whether we look at it as the debt by 5 installments or 5 installments by the debt. Let me write it down again. Right? Minus 3 multiplied by 5 is minus 15. And 5 by minus 3 is equal to the same minus 15. Okay. So what about a situation now where when I give the person the money that I have for them, they decide, now, here what? You could keep that. So in other words, when I give them the money, they give the money back to me. See how I take my time to define it, right? Because some of these things are difficult to visualize in other types of topics. So I'm trying to use something that we are accustomed with, situations that we could all relate to, and tying it back to the signs now in the maths. So plus 5 means that every time I pay out the debt of $3, that is $3 are gone. Our money gone. Right? Gone. $3 paid out 5 times, $15 gone. Or 5 installments. Each installment is $3. The minus sign, of course, showing that the $3 leave in my pocket. It means that eventually, we have a total of $15. We have a total of $15 having left my pocket. The negative sign being the thing that communicates that the $15 gone. No problem. Consider now the situation where when I pay the money to the person that I owe him, for whatever reason, the person say, here, hold on. Right? We all would have had situations where a debt was written off in whole or in part. Sometimes we are the ones that write off a debt in whole or in part. So, in contrast to the previous situation where I pay me $3 5 times, right? That $3 being represented by minus 3, money going out. In this situation now, when I pay my money 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, each time I pay out the money, the person say, look, here what? Hold that. I'm giving you back the money. Or maybe the person just tell you, well, here what, don't bother about that money. That $3 they have for me, hold on to that. So in other words, you either pay the money and they give you back the money, or you just don't have to pay out the money at all. So in other words, one of 2 things happens. Either the money leaves and it comes back, or it doesn't leave at all. That is a situation that we could represent. Instead of plus 5, we could represent that as minus 5. So in other words, if I pay out a debt of minus 3, well, $3, the minus is the debt. Once, that's $3 out. If instead of the money staying out, the money comes back to me, or the money doesn't leave at all, we could represent 1. We could change that 1 to minus 1. In which case, in the situation itself, you know that the $3 doesn't leave, or alternatively, it leaves and it comes back. So over here now, you don't have minus 3 again, you have plus 3, meaning that the money is staying. right, are trying to create a situation where we're dealing with the flow of money. Money going out, money coming in. In this case, money going out and coming back. Or the money ain't moving at all. We understand where the money would end up in each one of those situations, because these are the kinds of transactions that we make on a daily basis in regular day-to-day life. And what I'm saying is that we can represent these things mathematically, making use of the negative sign, and we could use those representations to represent and to illustrate general mathematical relationships that may be much harder to visualize in other types of situations. So in other words, when you see it here using money, which is something we all understand, it is easier then to accept and apply it somewhere else, where the visualization is just, you really can't visualize it, but you have the law in front of you and you could just use the law. I'm saying all that because some of us, we seem to have this need to understand every single thing we do before we do it. That is not always possible when you're doing maths. Sometimes you have to take things as they are. Take things as they are given to you and just accept it and move on. Sometimes you will understand it long after you accept it. Sometimes the understanding will come not too long thereafter. In some cases, you might never understand it, but you might see it work, not knowing exactly how it works, but you know it works, so you just run with it. Yeah, that's how it is sometimes. I mean, from a teaching standpoint, I try my best anytime I have the chance to explain stuff to people, to try to break it down in a form where they can understand it. That's why I'm doing this series of videos, using our good friend, money. So, back to the talk again now. So in this case, this happens once. If this particular transaction happens 5 times, where the money goes out and comes back, or the money doesn't leave at all, we already agreed that we're representing this as -1 as opposed to +1, which would have been the case if the money went out and stayed out. In other words, you pay the money and the person you pay the money hold on to the money. They keep the money because you owe them the money and they keep it. Right? If instead of happening once, this was to take place 5 times, then that -1 would just become -5, which would mean then that in total, over 5 occurrences, we would either have a situation where the $15 stays with us, or the $15 leaves and returns. In either case, the end result is that the $15 here in my pocket, as opposed to being over there. Right? So in other words, you have your debt, you pay out the debt 5 times, but the debtor, creditor, debtor, right? The debtor or your creditor, the person that you owe any money to, decides to write off the debt, represented by -5. You see how much times I'm repeating and I'm trying hard to explain it, right? In that case, you know that the end result is $15 staying with you. So that scenario, contrived as it may be, but it happens, you know, in real life it does happen. This is an illustration after we agree on the definitions of a situation where a minus multiplied by a minus will give you a plus. So in other words, I have tried my best to explain why a negative by a negative is a positive. it is something that you just have to accept. There may be better explanations out there, I don't know. Right? We have YouTube now, we have technology now. There might be somebody somewhere with a better explanation. There may be a different kind of situation. It might be money, it might be something else, where you could show that a negative number multiplied by a negative number will give you a positive number. So in this regard, we have our next rule now that we could write, and I'm going to clear the space on the board to deliberately put it in a form where that is the only thing you're seeing. And we can say that in general, a negative number multiplied by a negative number will give you a positive number. Alright? That is another rule where we multiply negative numbers. So to briefly recap, again we're going to clear the board and write down all the three rules. The three rules that we need to remember where multiplication of negative numbers is concerned. 1. Positive by a negative is equal to a negative. 2. A negative by a positive is also equal to a negative. 3. A negative by a negative is equal to a positive. And before all of those things, the one that we already familiar with, the one that we know, the one that we learning as tables since we small, a positive by a positive will give you a positive. So in other words, this being so familiar, I didn't even spend time discussing that because it had nothing to discuss there. We're familiar here already. Here, this zone here is the zone where we had a, for those of us who want some kind of discussion, I'll give you the discussion. But after the discussion, if there are certain things that you still don't understand, there is a certain level of acceptance where you just have to accept. So in other words, you don't have the luxury of waiting until you understand everything in totality. Sometimes you just had to go. Sometimes you had to start moving first before the understanding comes. Maths is like that in a lot of cases, and sometimes there have other things in life that like that too. Right? So that is why I have the exercises to practice. So in the section of the relevant document, there are 4 exercises under multiplication. There's an exercise for this scenario which we're already familiar with. This is basically just a revision of irregular tables, irregular multiplication tables, where the both numbers are positive. Then we went into this, a positive number multiplied by a negative number to give you a negative number. Then we went over here, a negative number by a positive number to give you a negative number. And then we went over here, a negative number by a negative number to give you a positive number. So at the end of the day, whatever the level of understanding, you have the opportunity to just move, get a rhythm, get a flow, get it into your system so that it could function. Don't let a lack of understanding or a perceived lack of understanding be the reason why you don't just go. Right? I never see anybody not drive a car because they don't understand how the car works. I never see anybody not use a phone because they don't understand how the phone works. I never see anybody refuse to eat a plate of food because they don't understand all the logistics of planting the seed and rearing the animal and harvesting the crop and cooking the meat and seasoning and all of that, right? So in other words, we know how to function when we don't understand stuff, because we just had a function. So there are times in maths too where you have the opportunity to just go, even if you don't understand it. And that is the whole point of why I put the exercises. I try to break it down as simple as possible, accompanied by the explanation. We talk and we talk and we talk and we talk and we talk, so that the people who need the talk could benefit. Some people, you had to talk. They wouldn't be able to just accept stuff if you don't try to explain it to them. So I do my part in terms of trying to explain. Now you have to do your part. Practice.